Everyone, welcome to Overnight TV. I'm Keith Robinson. This video you're about to watch is a conversation between me and Dr. Janet Bastiman. So Janet is one of the top data science leaders in the UK. She's got over 20 years experience at the very heart of the industry. And today we're going to be discussing top tips for delivering agile data science in a distributed world. So part one, we focus on communication skills, and you're going to get some real practical tips on how to keep good communication when everyone's working from home. Part two will be more focused on data science related challenges, more specifically agile data science, the challenge that brings over the next 3 months. So watch to the end, subscribe, watch part two, and enjoy this conversation between me and Dr. Janet Bastiman. Thank you. So thanks for talking to me today. So the subject for discussion is sort of top tips for delivering agile data science in a distributed world. So I thought we'd kick us off just framing the problem. And there's three challenges I currently see for data science, and please feel free to edit or add to this. So number one, clearly, just in terms of communication infrastructure, everyone working from home, setting up those channels, making sure everyone's aboard, and keeping the communication open between scientists, engineers, and the whole business. So challenge number one. The second thing, and this came up with a conversation with a customer yesterday, and I may be butchering this, so please correct me, but so the next 3 months of training data will significantly skew outputs of models.
Yeah.
And if you're using things like continuous deployment for the next sort of 3 months, and when we come out of this, the models will maybe spitting out outputs that are not relevant because they're based on sort of black swan anomaly of the last sort of 3 months. Or maybe this is the new norm, and they are right. I mean, who knows? I'm interested to understand how you can balance keeping sort of core agile principles while bearing in mind the context and what the data these models will be ingesting in the next 3 months will mean. Mm-hmm. And number three, related to that, is how do you prioritize this current environment? Managing short and long term, given how quickly it's changing, I imagine it's going to be difficult for data science teams. Yeah. So that's my thoughts. If anything else you want to add to that, edit that, feel free to.
Yeah, I think the only other thing, which is kind of an add-on to the communication, is more the data access and the security side of it, which I know a lot of companies just don't have right for on-premise, and they currently struggle, or prior to our current situation, they have been struggling when people have wanted to work from home because there wasn't the things in place for them to access the data. Right. And of course, now everyone is working from home. They just don't have what they need in place from a security and an access point of view in order to get the right data to the right people and then deal with that and have the right policies in place for getting rid of it once it's been used. So I think, but on top of that, yeah, the communication and the blips for the data are definitely two big problems at the moment.
Yeah. So how difficult is setting up the security aspect of things?
Conceptually, it's not that difficult, but it does take effort. So depending on what sort of data you've got, you will have to put more or less levels of security in place. So if you're dealing with personal data, anything covered by GDPR, you're going to have to put some quite strict stuff in place.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with data that maybe your customer's given you that's already been pre-anonymized and it's just maybe transactional data or product data or something that isn't identifiable to a person in any way, then you still want to keep it secure because you don't want to say to your client that that data is now freely available on the internet, but you can do things in a slightly different way than the really rigorous stuff that you'll need to do if you're dealing with financial or personal information. All of the information to do that is out there. There's a whole load of best practices in terms of looking after data. So firstly, making sure that you have very, very tight access to the raw data itself. So the encryption to access it, logging as to who accesses it, it's never unencrypted in transit, things like that, that are all pretty standard, but a lot of companies fail to do because, especially if you're in a startup, it's very easy to just spin up a database in the cloud, put some data in it, and then you think, I'll come back to that later. And then 2 years down the line, as the business grows, it becomes this huge piece of technical debt, and it's harder and harder to do the longer you leave it. So getting that in place up front is really critical. And then there's the state of making sure that people have access to everything they need, but only what they need. So defining what that is. And for data science, that can change very drastically depending on the project you're working on. So looking at what do I need to solve this problem, and making sure that everyone in your team has that access, but that they don't get given access above that. Again, it's really easy to do a blanket, oh, I'll just let them access everything. And then you start getting into these dangerous situations where people can maybe accidentally edit things, or just not have the understanding of the security that they need to put in place around things, particularly if you have team members who come from academia, where the rules are a little bit more relaxed. They don't have this huge concept and burden of, we need to treat this data with respect. We need to be very careful about what we transfer. And when you've got everyone working from home, the thought that your very, very precious data is being taken over the internet, potentially unencrypted, maybe onto their personal hardware that you have no control over. And then all of a sudden, something's sat on a laptop that, I mean, okay, there's less of a risk these days that they might leave it in a coffee shop, but it's still something that's unencrypted in their home that has the potential to be lost. Or, you know, imagine if the virus and Trojan checkers on their personal kit wasn't up to scratch, that data's suddenly out there. So there's a lot of processes and policies that you need to put in place, and it's good to have them in place regardless, even once we're out of this period, because I strongly believe that we're all getting used to working from home. So I think it's going to become more common, even when everything lifts and we have the opportunity to enjoy our commutes into big bustling cities. People might work from home more often. So having all this in place is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's to underscore that point. I think it's come up a lot of conversations, is using this time to stress test your previous processes and business models, and making sure it's adapted to the 2020s. This sort of working will be more relevant and more consistent, no doubt. Yeah. So if you're head of data science, you're in a startup, and up to this point, nobody's been allowed to work from home, you're not set up for this situation at all, what would be sort of your top three starting points of sort of best steps, platforms, technology, processes? What would you do?
Okay, so firstly, as we just discussed, getting the data so that all of your team can access it. So I would probably work with the engineers in the company and various people from our teams. What data is needed? How secure does it need to be? And I would create something that was accessible. And depending on the company, that could be something in the cloud. You might need to have a VPN into a particular system. I'd make that a copy of my live data rather than real data, just out of habit. But you need to have that access. So secure access for the people that need it on the smallest amount of data that you can get away with so that they can do their job. That would be the absolute first thing I'd set up. Then I'd also make sure that all of the team test their access to that and understand these implications of taking data out of that data silo. So if they have that data locally, they need to make sure that it's stored encrypted, that their personal machine has a certain mandated level of antivirus, anti-Trojans, regardless of what platform they're using. It's not just Windows machines that are liable for these things. So even if you're using Linux, if you're using Macs, you need to make sure you've got all the security features set up. Also, silly little things like locking your machines. People think they don't need to do that when they're at home, but anyone who has got a pet, particularly cats, you do not want to leave access to your company's crucial database open and your cat to walk over your keyboard and delete everything. But people don't think of that. So you just need to reinforce sort of really good best practices that were in the office, apply them at home. Once everyone can access everything and you've got that in place, that they've got that security and they've got their data, they should then be able to do their job on their home machine. So then it becomes a communication issue. And this is where Agile really comes into its own. If you're doing big projects in the office, you're wandering around, you're seeing what people are doing and you're keeping on top of them. Whereas with Agile, you've broken everything down into small pieces. You're doing lots and lots of very fast iterations, and there's the requirement for feedback at the end of each little step. So you need to have something like a Trello board or Jira or Slack or some sort of communication tool so that the team can check in every day. And as a leader, you need to be encouraging and promoting that communication. Regardless of whether that's something that comes naturally to you or not, depending on your leadership style, it's even more important when you're remote. You've got to encourage your team to let you know how they're getting on, what's blocking them, all the things that you can't see, because unless you're keeping a 24-hour open video on them, you don't know when they're struggling. So you're going to have to really push for that communication and challenge them if they're not doing things quickly enough.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that was going to my mind is, is it in a distributed model, is it easier for data scientists to get into a bit of a rabbit hole, go into a research rabbit hole, if they're not communicating as much as they would be face to face? I guess that's one of the crucial elements of keeping accountability.
Yeah, absolutely, because like I say, you're not there, you can't see it. So if you get stuck on a problem, most of us will go, I'll try and solve this myself, but you can lose track of time and you can spend far too long trying something and it not working, trying something else. And then before you know it, you've lost a whole day, which might not sound like much, but if that's happening every single day, you're going to end up with no productivity. So as the leader, you're going to have to keep on top of your team and make sure that they know that it's okay to come to you and that you can share in their problems, and just constantly ask them, how's it going? Where have you got up to on this? More so than you would do in the office.
Yes, and just on top of that, I mean, is there an element of the communication about keeping morale and focus at the moment? I mean, given the bombard of bad news that's going on at the moment, I've personally switched off from that. Haven't looked at the news for 3 weeks. I think that's been a good decision. I guess managing focus and morale as part.
I think
as a leader,
it's important that every time you have video communications, you have those personal chats. The things that someone comes into the office, hi, how are you? How was your weekend? Keep up with those, whether that's again on Slack or on regular video calling, something like that, just to make sure that you're keeping that personal communication. There's a lot of really good resources out there. One of the things that my company's been really good on is some of the stuff from Mind, the mental health charity. They've got a lot of mental health in workplace, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses, and they've produced a lot of resources about coping. So if the news is getting you particularly anxious, sort of things you can do. And it's a lot of really good stuff, particularly for leaders to have a look at, but definitely keep up with the personal communications and the routine. It's difficult when you're working from home if you don't have a dedicated space. I'm really lucky. I can shut the door, I can work for 8 hours a day, and then I can walk out of that room and I can go to my normal life. Whereas a lot of people I know, they're trying to work on the kitchen table or in a bedroom, or they just don't have the space. And it can be really difficult to separate work from life in that situation. And that can put a lot of extra stress on top of yourself in addition to constant bad news. So it's really, really important to, particularly as a leader of teams, to ensure that your team are doing okay, that they've got that separation, and that if they need to take a break, that's okay. They don't just have to sit for 4 hours and take a lunch break and then another 4 hours. If they need to just be a little bit more flexible so that they're happy and motivated, then that's fine. And that can be one of the hardest things if you've never managed a remote team before, is trusting your team to do the right thing. And it'll take them a while to get used to it if they've not worked from home before, but you've got to give them the space and the support. And then with the communication, they'll start to move back into just working as normal.
Yeah, great. I'll link in the comments to the Mind stuff that you mentioned there. Sounds good. So what does your sprint look like in terms of practicality on the comms? What are you doing day to day for comms? Doing stand-up every day, retrospective every day, or
just because I'm homeschooling at the moment, my hours are all over the place. So I work from 6 a.m. to 8:30, and then from about lunchtime through to 7 p.m. One of my team works completely normal hours, and another one of my team starts a bit later in the morning and works later. So we tend to have about a lunchtime stand-up, which is on Slack. So we just discuss what we're doing, any problems, but we have that open Slack channel just for the team. And like this morning, I was just putting just thinking out loud thoughts in, so that when the other team came online, they can have a look, and if they've got anything they can add to it, they can just write that so that I can then pick it up when I come in. But we like to try and have proper communications when we're all online, but we just keep pinging each other on Slack throughout the time. We have Zoom video calls with the whole company, at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. We have, virtual beer sessions, or we're talking about, or afternoon tea, or whatever anyone fancies, just so that we're there. We're just chatting about things. There's normally a question of the day. I think last week we had what was the first concert you ever went to, and what was the first job you ever did, just to try and find out a bit more about people. We've also set up virtual coffee sessions. So randomly 2 people are chosen, or you're paired with someone else in the company, to just have half an hour and a bit of a chat about something. And that's been really good, just allowing us to talk to other people about things and picking up on what's going on in different parts of the business. Because that's one of the other big communication problems. You can manage your team and you can be really communicative, but the other thing you'll miss out on is what's going on outside of your team.
Yes.
So get your own team communications right, and then make sure you're reaching out to your peers, to people dealing with the customers and the engineers, so that you know what their pain points are and what they're expecting from you, because that's something else that people usually forget as soon as you get isolated into a home working situation.
Great. So just to reflect back to what I've heard there is to keep communication lines open. You're hosting sort of regular town halls online, both informally and formal conversations, work and non-work related, to keep those relationships and communication channels open. And this reminds me of a podcast I was listening to, interview with Matt Mullenweg, who's the guy who created WordPress. And he's got a 1,000-person organisation that's completely remote, so completely distributed. They've got no office, and that piece around people working different time zones. This opens up all sorts of opportunities about having teams elsewhere, and just your whole recruitment model can change because you can work in this slightly different. There'll always be challenges with different time zones, but it does open up that possibility, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've managed teams in the past, spread both from sort of UK and Europe over to West Coast US, and I think I even had one guy in Australia at one point. So the overlap is quite interesting. It's always been nice having that confidence that someone was working while I was sleeping.
Yeah.
Because if something critical happened, if systems started going down or there was a huge bug, there was somebody awake who was fully alert, who could jump on it. And then you just need to have the handovers. And as long as you've got an hour or so that the team can hand over to the next people coming online, it can work really, really well. I think it's definitely a model I can see more businesses picking up going forward.
Hi everyone, me again. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for part 2. It's coming up real soon. More content to come. So hit subscribe now, and you're going to get data-driven content straight into your inbox every time we post, which will be at least once a week. So do it now. Share with your friends. And yeah, thanks for watching.